You're on the Deadline Report with Ben Vigil Investigates. I'm doing my pre-recording shows for Fresh FM, which we do plays live on Sunday afternoons at 1 p.m. and Wednesday nights at 9 p.m. So you can sit there in your bathrobes, have your late breakfast as I'm doing this morning with muffins and coffee and Yoda. And I will get back to Yoda in a second because today his wisdom on fear leads to anger and anger leads to the dark side is really appropriate because we're talking about the nature of terrorism and my road to 9/11, eventually my road to March 15th. Previous shows we've looked at the pre-World War II history of a lot of the organisations that actually are very key players in understanding contemporary terrorism today. We followed up the following show basically looking at some of the reward signings about 9/11 on my own personal experiences and things I've written about, which show to me conclusively that when the intelligence service says that they had no idea that this terrorist attack was occurring, just like as one with March 15th, which we'll go into when I get to that, that is just simply factually a big lie, and the intelligence services are very good at lying with us. And again, when there's a lot of talk out there at the moment, which is sort of basically trying uh, to smear or belittle anybody that critiques the official viewpoint, led by people like Helen Clark, who after March 15th said, right, we're going to get those conspiracy theory bastards. I think those were her exact words. Um, but what a lot of these people who are writing this critique forget, and in their speed to dismiss people who are not as acceptable of the Easter Bunny, the Tooth Fairy, and Father Christmas as they are, is that governments have got a very long and messy history of lying to their people and actually utilising violence to carry out terrible, terrible things, and they've done it repeatedly, time and time and time again. So really, I would say to anybody that wants to use the word conspiracy theorist that more than likely that's probably because you're using the language of a coincidence theorist. This is someone who goes through life with their thumb, sucking their thumb, and are quite happy to believe that all these things are not connected and that each story comes out in the newspaper has nothing to do with history. These are people that are fundamentally actually quite naive. And what annoys me most when I look at all these events, and you always see often, is that people like Stuff or the Herald will get someone who's a psychologist who'll go on blather on about conspiracy theories. And my approach to that is, well, number one, you're a psychologist. You're not actually a political scientist. You haven't actually done any special studies on espionage or subterfuge. So you have no greater professional knowledge of that area than the average layman. So you're not really qualified to be speaking on these issues to begin with. Number two, the issues which they critique and call conspiracy theories is, again, they are not researching the subject matter. So, having not researched the situation, it's like you're going to tell us people have these conspiracy theories about something you haven't done your homework on. How does that work? um, and so, at the end of the day, I've just, and of course, the third aspect of it is that the situation is that if you critique the government or you have don't accept what your government tells you, that potentially maybe you're a dangerous person. Well, when I hear psychologists saying that and I see it appear in a mainstream newspaper, I want to reach through and grab the editor and punch them repeatedly. So I am a dangerous person, because I can't believe that such a dangerous statement should be allowed in a democratic nation which is meant to be adhere to the principles of a free press, and that the idea that people have right to have expressed their political ideas and their viewpoints in the world. And the moment that we stop thinking that's the case, then you're actually accepting that you're part of a totalitarian government, and that means you give your government permission to carry out all sorts of excessive crimes against those who don't play the game. And again, very recently, we actually had a family friend of ours, a man called Willie Hoover. Turned out that during the war he'd fought in the Russian for the Germans for the SS, which I actually was quite surprised to find out. But at the end of the day, there was never any suggestion that Willie had ever committed any atrocities. Nobody suggested, but the very fact that he had fought on one side was enough to have people turn around and actually say, no, we can't name that after Willie Hoover. That's terrible. He's a Nazi. going, well, no, he was just a man caught up in events, as a lot of young men were at that particular time and occurrence. But more importantly, we should be using Willie Hoover, that event. It's possibly an unfortunate, but now that's happened, let's use that situation to talk to people about how the events of the Holocaust actually take place. And again, this is something very personal for me. Growing up, I moved several schools. We moved around the country quite a bit, and as a series of consequences of this, I found myself 3 years in a row studying the history of Nazi Germany, the same curriculum again and again. As opposed to being bored about it, as I saw these black and white photos of people that were skinny as skeletons behind the fences in places like Auschwitz, the Jews with the stars upon them, literally the furnace of bodies just piled up of dead bodies, all being shown as a young, between ages of 9 to 12 years old, these photos, and our children were not shielded from the horrors of the Nazi German period. It basically, the whole sort of what I learned, which became very important about and what drove me to, I guess, to being really what I call, I spent my life writing against terrorism, is the fact that when you give the state excessive power, this is what you allow to happen. And that we forget this, or that we allow governments to talk about in the manner that they are currently speaking now, it scares the hell out of me. And I'm not like, sometimes you hear government think, oh, this is a slippery road. I'm saying we're going down the slide, and it needs to stop. Governments need to be put in their place and say, actually, what we choose to believe is none of your business, and we have the right to believe that. And of course, various people turn around and say, oh, no, but you can't believe that. Oh, that's... Then they're going, well, Voltaire, who was a revolutionary writer during the period of the French Revolution, and a philosopher, said very well, I may not agree with your right to say it, but I'll defend your right to say it to the death. And that's, I'm the same. I do not, obviously, I've marched for gay rights, I have marched for Maori land rights, I have protested against nuclear war. I've spent my entire life effectively trying to be a good person who recognises that everybody else has a say at the table. But it doesn't mean that I will never turn around, even when someone says something that I don't want to hear, say, oh, no, we can't have that, that's terrible, that's terrible. When you suppress stuff, that is when you create the fester, which then allows terrible acts of terrorism or extremism to take place. When we get into the next part of the next take, I'm going to take a little bit of a break now. We'll kind of come back to this, and we will start off how we'll start looking a little bit at some of the events that actually took place during 9/11, which and the surrounding events, which should show to us that the mainstream media, in their claims that they're running around today, they talk about fake news and the fact that they don't have any credibility or right to talk about people delivering bad news when they have a serial. They are serial offenders for downplaying or omitting or simply lying about information because they haven't checked it, because it goes along with a set agenda of the corporation that media is part of, whose function is to make money. And when you're looking at professional corporate media organisations who are driven by profit, it never gets in the row of their ability to actually tell you events truthfully, or tell you all the key facts, which may sometimes be inconvenient truths. You're listening to Fresh FM, and we are going to take a little bit of a break right now, and I'm trying to think of a song to play, and I think we are going to play The Peace Train, because at the end of the day, that's what we all want, is a little bit of peace. You're listening to the Deadline Report with Ben Vigil Investigates on Fresh FM. And I'm back again. Deadline Report, Ben Vigil Investigates. We're doing our little terrorism study today, peace series. We are now, having covered the past events up to 9/11, we're now deep into the event. 9/11 has taken place. I've seen that literally, I'm typing away at my own book about banks and mosques, which will actually prove to be directly tied into 9/11 and have intelligence connections at that time, then 9/11 occurs. Now, I had a chance to interview at one point a man called Robert Carlyle, I think is his name. Glenn Carl, sorry. Glenn Carl was a author of a book called The Interrogator. He worked for the Central Intelligence Agency. He was a member of the CIA. Um, and I was interviewing him on Radio 1, the Dunedin University radio station. And we were talking about we began by talking about his experience, and he was saying how effectively that in Washington, his problem was dealing with people that were members of the intelligence community that were operating outside of what they call outside the reservation, in other words, without official sanction, and how they were largely influenced by the various political parties, and in turn, the political parties were influenced by the corporate lobbying factions, which in America, of course, is the military-industrial complex, big tech, big pharma. A lot of these organisations, people like IGB Farben, or so to say, Bayer Pharmaceuticals, that when you actually look into them, same with IBM, they've got very nasty histories, and you find that they actually they've had very close collaborations with the far right, and even including the Third Reich period during World War II. And they have this huge sway in Washington. And of course, we've already experienced things like the Iran-Contra affair, where Americans were supplying weapons to far-right, basically terrorists in Central America to overthrow existingly democratically elected governments. So literally entire governments were being overthrown. We have the same organization responsible, allied with the Cambodian Khmer Rouge, who literally murdered and exterminated millions and millions of people. So these people have a proven, they're quite happy to leave pools and pools of blood behind them. And so we're looking at these events in 9/11, and I'm talking about, he's saying, yes, well, this is what his experience was. And I'm a bit intrigued with Mr. Carlyle, because even though he's coming across as like, oh no, I'm against the CIA and I'm a whistleblower, his demeanour, big American college ring on his hand, the big suit and tie, it still screamed. It didn't really come across to me as he wasn't the picture of liberalness. It was the very element of, there was very much a very still conservative person. And he's presenting this event, and we get to the subject of 9/11, and I said, look, I'm just going to dive in here a little bit. We're not going to go too far down the road. We're going to offend your sensibilities too much. But I said, where do you feel about the situation of 9/11? I mean, there's lots of questions and events. He said, oh no, that's all been officially investigated, and I'm like, well, not really, Glenn, because if you look at the event of the collapse of the Twin Towers, number 7. This is a 42-story building. There are actually 3 buildings that collapsed on 9/11 on the day. The Twin Towers, which are obviously 2 towers, and the third building, which is called World Trade Center 7. And again, if you want to go and do your own independent Google research, there's lots of really good mainstream articles. Really, without having to go down the conspiracy theory hole, you'll find that there's this building's destruction is unusual, most of which, as I said to Glenn Carlyle, was the fact that the building was completely omitted from the official published report into 9/11. So a 42-story building collapses, and it doesn't even get a mention in the appendix of the official inquiry into the 9/11 terrorist attack. So I said, well, it wasn't really investigated, was it? Because it's not even there. And I said during the 9/11 investigation, people weren't the authorities weren't allowed to subpoena witnesses. People that were testified didn't have to do it under oath, so they didn't have to worry about being caught for subject to perjury. The event, the actual Twin Towers building itself, was shipped up and put on boats and shipped out to China. So the crime machine was literally shipped away, 3,000 people murdered, and there isn't really an investigation on the actual ground zero. And Glenn Carl turns around to me and the mask drops off at this particular moment, and he gets all snarly, and I'm like, I back off. But it made me very realize in that particular moment that the cognitive dissonance for the idea that there actually may be something not right about 9/11 went very, very deep into people. And even a person that like Glenn Carl, who professed to be a whistleblower for the CIA, when push come to shove, he wasn't willing to turn around and deal with some very overt facts. And this is what I found quite intriguing about the whole 9/11 event, was how when you turn around and you start to talk to people in the mainstream media, one case I remember encounter with John Campbell over this, or Kim Hill, I think she was Richard Gage, architects for 9/11, she interviewed, and when he went, she had him on the show, and she basically beat the hell out of him. And whenever he went to turn around and actually give her examples, she said, no, I don't want about that. She had already in her mind pre-decided this is what the events were, and there was never going to be an attempt for him to be allowed in a fair manner to present his arguments about why he thought that process. And of course, here's the 9/11, our newspapers turn around and they're going about conspiracy theorists and fake news. Well, the events of 9/11 were, of course, then utilised by the US government and then its allies in the United Kingdom via more lies and misinformation to lead to a military invasion of Iraq, which would subsequently now see 60,000 excessive Iraqis die violently, not to mention the tens of thousands of Iraqis that will die down in the decades to come because of the depleted uranium used by American soldiers and the other contaminants that come with modern warfare. This is the corporate media telling us that, oh no, we can't trust these people who've got critique the government, when the reality is they have shown a history of accepting information from the official sources which is untested, unproven, and yet they'll accept it, even though these same parties have not only a history of actually being repeatedly they're lying. They are deliberately planting false information time and time again, because that's what the CIA is designed to do. It's there for the art of deception, as any intelligence agency, modern intelligence agency, is run for. And time and time again, our corporate media choose to forget that, as they repeatedly get us trying to listen to the same bollocks again and again. So it's not actually illogical or mentally wrong to turn around and be suspect or believe that there are nefarious things going on within the halls of power, because history shows you that you're usually right. That's all the way back to the Trojan horse with the nature. Conspiracy is the nature of both politics, of Earth's politics and global history. So when we turn around, we start to look at things like 9/11. It's, I found another little interesting story, which intrigued me, was that when I went to the libraries on the event of 9/11 itself in the key city of Wellington, New Zealand, which is our capital, it's our political capital, and I went to the main library and I went to get out all the American papers so that I could cross-reference what was being said online with what was actually in the American papers to make sure that the online information was accurate with the hard copy papers. And actually, I couldn't do that because on that day I discovered all the American papers had vanished from the library in Wellington. And when I went to the front desk to ask, never has there been an event more importantly to know what's happening in an American paper than today, only to be told, they said, oh no, well actually we get provided these papers by the US Embassy, and the US Embassy has chosen now no longer to give us these newspapers. So these events, which those sort of things should ring alarm bells to people. When people start to withhold information, when entire 42-story buildings are actually not in reports, it's reason to be concerned. During 9/11, we also saw the event happen where originally there was a suggestion that the 9/11 terrorists had carried out the use of an anthrax as well, and they were being blamed for the emergence of anthrax that broke out, and all around the country, around the world, little white, parcels will be opened with little white powder, including what today is an agency known as Cordia, but then would have been the New Zealand Broadcasting Authority Agency, which was on Tory Street opposite, just down the road from El Casino in Wellington. So if you know that very famous restaurant, you'll know the building. They also had one of these little samples actually pop up, and of course what not most people know is that that building, or Cordia, was during World War II when they were the New Zealand Broadcasting Authority. They also were the people that actually ran a lot of the propaganda on behalf of the state, and we'll come back to them when we get to Christchurch. So when the white powder was found in the United States, and it all looked like the terrorists were responsible, and there were articles about the fact that the first person to get it in Florida was a person that had rented the house to the 9/11 terrorists, and there were these connections that were, so you could see where the story has been building. Then the Federation of American Scientists, the most prestigious scientific body in America, stuck their hands up and said, one small problem, that anthrax is ours. It comes from Fort Detrick, and it comes from laboratory lab number 21, whatever it was. And then that whole anthrax story disappeared. But in the meantime, it had already emerged that it said that, oh yes, Mohammed Atta, the chief 9/11 terrorist, he can be filmed taking a canister of anthrax off that Iraqi colonel, part of the making this whole construction to lead to the war, which became known as the invasion of Iraq, or the looting of Iraq's oil resources, and of course led to the war in Afghanistan, of both of which New Zealand, in return for milk dollars, became involved in both the war into Iraq and Afghanistan, and of course they participated in the United Nations Food for Oil program, which was basically the kickback scheme for Saddam Hussein, involving Fonterra again. And of the 80% of the milk that was actually shipped into Iraq under the Food for Oil program, 80% of that was done by 23 companies that all subsidiaries, taking the New Zealand milks, repackaged in places like Vietnam or Saudi Arabia, repackaged, but New Zealand milk, sent into Iraq, and all as subsidiaries of one company which was called HSA Yemen, who shareholders were not only members of the Muslim Brotherhood, but they were actually in fact members of the bank Al Taqwa, which I talked to you about, the bank that financed the 9/11 and had the neo-Nazi CIA connections. So it also has a New Zealand connection, which is literally what I had been writing about on the night of 9/11, or the morning of 9/11. So when that event occurred, and they talked about the Iraqi colonel meeting the 9/11 terrorist Mohammed Atta, this was originally reported in Jane's Intelligence, very prestigious military journal. The incident was the Czechoslovakians had seen, they knew this had happened because the Czechoslovakian police had put them under surveillance, but they only knew that it was actually Mohammed Atta and the Iraqi colonel because the identities were shown to them by a member of what would later emerge as a member of Israeli intelligence. Now, when the 9/11 event, the anthrax, the lien came apart because it was actually traced, that anthrax was actually literally traced back to the US military's own laboratory. It didn't stop the fact that it showed you that the intelligence services were actively putting Mohammed Atta under surveillance up to a year ago. This is a person that we're now told officially they had no idea existed, but there we have the Jane's Intelligence report showing you, well, that's not true. And further, because we now know that the anthrax is just like the yellow cake and the missiles that can hit London, all proved to be lies, but it shows you, because that event took place before 9/11, that an event was being fabricated and a story built around it. That event of the colonel and the Mohammed Atta actually meeting each other in Czechoslovakia is the smoking gun that something is terribly, terribly wrong with 9/11. And I think I'll leave it there today. There's lots and lots of things I could love to tell you all about 9/11. We will leave it at this point, and we will come back to you next week, and I'll do the final list event. I might even get to have to do two more, But our next event is we're going to start talking about the events in Christchurch on March 15th. You're listening to the Deadline Report, Ben Virgin Investigates, Fresh FM. You can visit the listen to me live Sundays 1 p.m, Wednesday nights 9 p.m. You can come and look me up on YouTube as you're doing right now as I show off my wonderful Yoda t-shirts in my bathroom as my late breakfast. You can come and visit my website, so I'm not hard to find, and hopefully you enjoy the content. And we have a little donation box, so please feel free to drop something in there because that's how I fund the show. Thank you very much, and you all have a good weekend now. Well, essentially, now you have a good weekend. Bye.